Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Managing Disruptive Change, the sources of disruptions. In the last week, we've seen that there are companies who were disrupted, like Kodak. There are companies who came along quite well with potential disruptions, like IBM. And there are potential disruptors. What we also have seen is that there are many potential disruptions out there. However, a company doesn't really know which is the most important one and how the market will develop in the future. And we had the example of Mercedes, and there are many various influences, drivers in that market that might entirely change the market. However, if you ask even experts today, nobody really knows what is the most important influence. That leads to the point that if you face exactly that situation, it is very important to better understand what is the driver in the market, where could a potential disruption come from, how important is that change in the market. So what we learned in the last week is that disruptions are really important because they have impact on business models, companies, and so on. Also from a theoretical perspective, it's a problem because of the organizational inertia that companies are really good in some sense, and this also makes them vulnerable. This week we go into looking further into the disruptions, potential sources of disruption, because what we like to understand is what are the underlying trends that lead to those changes. And if we look at various industries, and these are just examples, we can see that the deregulation of the transport industry in Germany, for example, lead to changes in the market. Nowadays we have buses going from A to B, which we haven't had before. In the US it already exists for years, in Germany it did not because it was regulated. So regulative environment could change, and regulative environment always leads to new companies. Technology changes, and Ray Kurtzman still says that the change of the next 20 years will be the same as the last 100 years. If you take that into account, and every one of us will see the next 20 years, we see what this could really mean for companies. So if you look as an example for 3D printing technology, that might entirely change customer behavior in terms of we just print our goods. That might change production processes all over. So technology is another driver for change. Customer behavior changes. If you look at the airline industry, a perfect example for the low cost and no frills movement. People want to go from A to B and they don't need comfort because it's a short distance flight and they don't want to pay too much. So they don't want to have the comfort because they're backpackers, for example. These customers are served by certain companies, and now these companies put pressure on the entire market. And the last one is competition, new players. New players come into the market. And Uber is a perfect example for that. We had the taxi market for a long time. It was very traditional. Uber came in, used private vehicles, private drivers in order to serve the same market. Competitors put pressure into the market. If you put that together, you can say we basically have 4 dimensions. The regulative environment as the first dimension, then the technology, second dimension, customer behavior, third dimension, and competition of new players that might potentially have an impact on the business model. However, if you look at specific companies, and we had this Mercedes example, and I'm putting up this slide again, you can first of all see that there are many developments in this market right now. You have electric mobility, especially being pushed by Tesla. You have shared driving being pushed by other companies, autonomous vehicles coming in there. You have the existing competitors putting pressure on those companies. So you have actually an example where competition, new players come in, so the one dimension. Technological innovation comes in, second dimension, and customer behavior changes, autonomous driving, the third dimension. So where more than one dimension is affected with some trends in the market. Which brings us to the point that we have to further understand where these disruptions really come from. So which are the trends in the market? And understanding these trends of the market helps us understand dimensions and helps us understanding how to react to these disruptions further. So this is why we'll look further into that.